The following is a production of the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network.
Welcome back to UFHL Now. I'm your host, Kyle Hall. And once again, another exciting week of hockey as we get closer and closer here to the end of the season and to the trade deadline. We have plenty of trade talk later on. A couple deals went down this week, including, and then our insider, Larry Fisher, has a list of some guys that he thinks that might be on the move. And we'll also have a very special guest later on. Before we send it to Larry and our guest, let's take over the standings here and take a look. We have a change in the top five, which we want to show you right now. The Titans, again, hold on to the top spot, but sneaking into the top five are the Stingray, knocking out Rock Republic. So the Stingrays sneaking into the top five there, and we expanded the standings this week to 13 teams because you look at Red Army there at number 10, 580 points away from first place, but right on their heels are the Yeti, Battlehawks, and Can West Generals. So basically, you have three teams there right below the Red Army trying to sneak into the top 10. The only change from last week was the Rock Republic and Stingrays. So Titans, Royals, and West Coast Express stay 1, 2, 3, and the Grizzlies stay at number 4. The Ice Vikings, Kamikaze, Gators, and Red Army stay in the top 10 as well, with just the Rock Republic and Stingrays there swapping spots. But it's a tight, close battle here to break that top 10. The playoff races they look awesome. They're going to be really exciting here in the last couple weeks of the year. I think it's less than, I think 30 games is the most games that a team has left now to play for the rest of the season. So it is all coming to a head very quickly. Now let's take you into our who's hot and who's not this week. Starting with our who's hot. Our first who's hot is Jason Robertson. 3 games this week, 7 goals. I think he had back-to-back hat tricks this week. 7 points, 27.05 fantasy points for the North Stars forward. The Dallas Stars have something special in this young American forward. I saw a couple of the commentators saying that this guy could be the next great American hockey player, which is awesome to see. I got a chance to cover him at the last World Championships this last summer. Unbelievably skilled player. Great, I interviewed him twice. Great guy to talk with, so I'll always root for him. Happy to see a North Stars forward get on the board here. I have a huge week, 7 goals. I'm pretty sure it's back-to-back hat tricks. I might be wrong there. I know it's hat trick. I think it was Sunday night. But huge week for the Dallas Stars forward. Next on the list, we have Nick Schmaltz, the Stallion of the Stallions. He had 25.92 fantasy points in just 2 games this week. 3 goals and 5 assists in the 8 games. So huge week for the Stallions forward. I think this might be the Stallions. Might be their first who's hot player this year. I can't remember if they had another one. But congratulations to them and congratulations Nick Schmaltz on a great week. 25 points in only 2 games. Pretty incredible stuff there. 8 points in 2 games is great. Next on the list, we have Nick Suzuki. 25.15 fantasy points the last 3 games. He had 2 goals and 5 assists for 7 points for the Snipers. The Montreal Canadiens forward has had, I would say, a slow season after what a lot of people thought was going to be a breakout year following a fantastic Stanley Cup playoffs last year. But the Canadiens team in general has really struggled. But since Martin St. Louis has taken over the team, not only Suzuki, but players like Cole Caulfield have gotten a real boost from it. And the Canadiens are playing quite well right now. If they got any goaltending, they'd be playing even better. But obviously far out of the playoff race. But it's great to see Nick Suzuki bouncing back. And who knows? If Martin St. Louis sticks around for another season or so there and takes the interim tag off, maybe Suzuki could be looking at another career year next year under his guidance on the offensive side. But great week for the Snipers forward overall. Next up, we have Mikhail Sergachev, who I think we're going to hear from later on in the show for the Players of the Week. But 23.12 fantasy points in the last 4 games, 3 goals and 2 assists for 5 points for the Tampa Bay young defenseman. Strong Island's got an excellent young defenseman in Sergachev. He's been a fantastic player in Tampa for a couple of years now. And he's got the playoff experience under his belt. He's really stepped into a bigger and bigger role down there in Tampa when they lost a couple players this last season. So an unbelievably skilled young player, and he should be a force for Strong Island for years to come. And a big week for him this last week. And then our last skater on the list is Roman Yossi, making the case for a Norris Trophy there with probably Adam Fox and Cale Makar, but Yossi of the Crypto Knights, 22.76 fantasy points in just 2 games. He had 6 assists in the 2 games this week. Pretty impressive. We had 2 guys this week make the Who's Hot list on just 2 games played with the fantasy point production they put up. So great week for the Crypto Knights star defenseman Roman Yossi, who again will probably end up in that top 3, definitely top 5 for the Norris Trophy voting this season. And then our Who's Hot goalie of the week, my guy Igor Shesterkin of the Red Army, 23.70 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He went 3-0 with a 1.67 goals allowed, a 9.55 save percentage. Igor has slowly worked his way possibly into the Hart Trophy conversation. I think the season started off with, could he be the Vezina Trophy Award winner? Now is, can he be the Hart Trophy winner? His 9.42 save percentage this year is the second best mark ever in NHL history. So we'll see if he can get, I believe Jacques Plante, who has the record, is right ahead of him. But Igor Shesterkin having a unbelievable season. Frankly, one of the best goaltending seasons we've ever seen in the NHL. A huge week for the Red Army goalie, who is red hot right now. And if you're playing Red Army, I saw their GM talking some smack in the Telegram, saying that you don't want to play them come playoff time based off their goaltending. And I got to agree with him. If Igor Shesterkin stays on his game, he can carry the Red Army a very far away. So congrats to Igor and the Red Army on a fantastic week for the Rangers goaltender there. Now let's get into the Who's Not Hot this week. Samuel Girard of the Avalanche, a rough week. Negative fantasy points in the 3 games he played this week. A negative 0.08. Not good. 0 goals, 0 assists, and a -4 rating for the Brutes defenseman. Anytime you don't have a positive fantasy point week, it is never a good thing. So, Samuel Girard, welcome to the Who's Not Hot list. Next, we have Brent Burns. So you go from the Who's Hot list, the Who's Not list in 1 week. The Battlehawks defenseman, the former Norris Trophy winner, Brent Burns, only 0.9 fantasy points in the 3 games this week after putting up 20-something points last week in the 3 games he played. Had 0 points and a -5 plus-minus rating. It's crazy. That's how it goes. You can go from being the hottest player in the league to the worst player in the league in a week. It's crazy, but the Battlehawks defenseman, it was a rough one. I'm sure you won't see him too many times on this list, but pretty astonishing to see this week after last week, going from the Who's Hot to Who's Not. But sorry for the Battlehawks and sorry for Brent Burns there. Next, we have St. Louis Blues defenseman Justin Falk, 2.67 fantasy points in the last 3 games, 0 goals, 0 assists, -4 rating for the Gators defenseman. Again, not a good week for him, and I believe I saw his name possibly pop up in some trade discussion as well. So you have a bad week, you end up on the Who's Not list, and immediately you get thrown into possibly some trade talk. So the Gators defenseman, keep an eye on him. Could be on the move coming up. I can sense the Gators wanting to make a move here from some interactions I've seen in the trade block. Next on the list, we have another Avs player who, again, another player who you do not think you'll see on the Who's Not list. Mikko Rantanen, unbelievable player. I think he's the 8th ranked player fantasy points wise this season. 2.96 fantasy points in the last 3 games only. He was completely held off the score sheet with 0 goals and 0 assists and a -2 rating for the Godfather star. It's a tough week. A guy who you would always assume gets probably a point just by playing with those top guys there in Colorado on that explosive top line. But unfortunately, a tough week for the Godfather's star there. I'm sure he will bounce back. He's having a monster year. Like I said, I believe he's top 10 overall in fantasy points for skaters. So I'm sure Rantanen will bounce back, but a rough week there for the Godfather star. And next, I take no pleasure in saying this, but former New York Ranger Pavel Buchnevich of the Titans, 3.12 fantasy points in the last 3 games, held off the score sheet, -2 plus-minus rating. He made his triumphant return to MSG following the Rangers trade this last summer and got shut down by Igor Shesterkin. He had 2 excellent scoring chances that Igor robbed him on. So the Titans forward, unfortunately, ends up on the list this week for just over averaging 1 point of fantasy points per game. He's having a very good season though overall. I think he has the most points of any player that was acquired this last offseason to a new team. So he's playing very well for St. Louis. The Titans have been taking obviously been taking advantage of his excellent play all season. But this week, I'm sorry, Pavel, you end up on the Who's Not list, and Igor on the Who's Hot list probably because of those saves he made against you this last week. And then the goalie on this week is another former New York Rangers, Stingrays goaltender Cam Talbot. So even though Cam had a very poor week, the Stingrays still snuck in to the top 5. Cam just 3.7 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He went 0-2 with a 3.45 goals allowed and an 8.64 save percentage. A very rough week for the Wild goaltender. Overall though, Cam's had a very good season. He's had a couple struggles here recently, but he made the All-Star game, I believe, for the first time this year. But the Stingrays have obviously had great production from him this season, and the Minnesota Wild are pretty much riding him into the playoffs as one of the top teams in the West based off his excellent play there in Minnesota. But Cam Talbot, unfortunately, a guy who I loved from his time with the Rangers, who is landing on the Who's Not Hot list this week. And now let's take a look at the Elite Prospects Players of the Week. I think, we're going to see 3 guys that we've already seen. Jason Robertson is your forward of the week. The North Stars forward had 27.05 fantasy points. Mikhail Sergachev of Strong Island is your defenseman of the week with 23.12 fantasy points. And then your goalie of the week, Red Army goaltender Igor Shesterkin with 23.70 fantasy points. Congratulations to those 3 teams on their players being named to the Elite Prospects Players of the Week. And now I want to bring in our very special guest this week. There he is. He's right here. Donny Tulk, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing? Kamikaze owner and general manager.
Hey, Carl, man. Happy to be here. Big fan of the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to come on. Unfortunately, Kamikaze are right outside that top 5, but you guys are having a very good season overall. Let's just talk about some of the players who've maybe surprised you this year on the team, and some of the players that maybe you're a little disappointed this year.
To be honest, I never really. We wanted to improve, but we didn't expect to be a contender this year anyways, so we were just plugging holes. So guys like like Liam O'Brien actually just got a 2-year extension, so his value just went up. We brought those guys in, like Liam O'Brien, Boro Cop, brought that guy in. A few guys like that, just plug in holes. The goal is, at the end of the day, to make the team pay for itself, instead of at the end, I don't want to be paying registration. I want the team to pay for registration, just like anything else. So we got to have success to do that. But in all honesty, our plan was a 2-year rebuild. So we're in year 2 now. So by next year, I'm open to be a contender. As for guys who kind of surprised us, I think Tarasenko was one. We knew his ability, but we didn't know he would get back there. Jacob Trouba was another one. It was nice to see him come back into his old form. Big fan of that guy. John Gibson has been up and down. I'd like to see more consistency out of him, but still a young team there in Anaheim, so it is what it is, I guess.
I think John Gibson's probably the one who stands out the most to me. He's kind of had starring moments and then kind of had a couple rough seasons there. And this year, the Anaheim team, I would say, kind of came out of nowhere. You would expect them to probably be in the bottom of the barrel there in the West. But he's having a fantastic year, like you said, with some youth there. And it looks like that team's now building a core for the future.
Absolutely. I agree. Another guy would be Sam Bennett, but we kind of got a taste of that last year. The player that he could
Another guy
be,
who was,
so.
Yeah, a guy who had his whole career basically turned around there from that trade. And I'm sure, you're probably loving it. That the Florida team, anytime they play at home, they put up, 6 goals every night. So I'm sure anytime you see Florida at home, you start getting a little excited about what numbers he could put up.
Yeah, he's got all the tools to be a great fantasy player in this format. So we hope he keeps it going. Yeah.
Now, looking at the current standings and some of the playoff matchups that could occur, Rock Republic seems like you guys are on a collision course with each other now. Obviously, there's some history there, Donnie. There's some history we got to talk about. So, what do you think about possibly going against your former team there?
Oh, that's great. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wish both our teams success. The first, well, our five man group started the team there a couple years ago, and it came down mostly. It was me and Kyle that was doing the daily in and out negotiations and stuff. And it's safe to say, me and Kyle are from the same school of thought when it comes to how we approach building teams and the players we go after. We both love the cheap, rough guys. So it makes it easy to negotiate trades with each other as well, for that matter, because we both see value in the same areas. I feel the Rock is about a year ahead of Kamikaze in terms of being a contender, and I feel, yeah, our matchup would be pretty entertaining just because. But at the end of the day, I wish both teams great success, really.
Is there now you talked about how easy it is to work with him as a GM. Is there a certain GM that sticks out to you as maybe the hardest to work with or the most difficult GM to deal with?
I tended the guys that started here, I guess, when we did. Well, me and Kyle was one of the first guys, one of the first GMs, or two of the first GMs that came into the league. But there was guys like Arnie is a pretty crude negotiator, but he's good at what he does. You got to give him credit. He's a very good GM. And a few other guys. George is actually he sticks to his guns. Mick, I talked to Mick a lot. He's good GM as well. He's our negotiator. I've had times where Alessandro would rate me and he'd say, "Why do you talk to Mick? You guys never get anything done." So, but we talk a lot all the same. Yeah.
Now, you just made a big trade this last week with Rock Republic, sending Tarasenko the other way. So what led to that decision of getting rid of him and getting some, you got a couple draft picks back. Obviously, Noel Chari came back, who just started suiting up again for Florida again after being injured last year. So what led to that trade going down, and what's the thought process on that one?
Well, we were shopping Tarasenko and a few of the older guys like that got value, like Borowiecki and Ennis and a few of these guys. And Tarasenko, I mean, he's a lot of people are still reluctant in taking a chance on him, I guess, with his injury from last year. But having said that, he do carry a lot of weight and value, even at 7.5, and you get a short-term contract as well. So we wanted just a few young pieces. Actually, a cherry in that trade was I kind of took on the contract because he wasn't playing up to that point. So it was kind of just trying to add value to my side, basically. But it worked out that he's back to the lineup, so that's a great another trade piece, I guess.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
are you done dealing now? Are there more deals that you have in the works coming up? At the trade deadline, just 2 weeks away here? What's to be expected out of Kamikaze going forward?
Still looking to get younger. We're going to move out some. We got to make some roster room for our guys. Our young guys that's going to make teams next year. Or we're open is going to make the teams next year, like Frost, for example. McMichael, Boldy. Well, Boldy is pretty much in the lineup all the time anyway. But guys like that, Quinn. Quinn. Soderstrom, all those guys, we're hoping that they're all going to be regular contributors next year. So we got to make the room for that. So you'll see. Hopefully, you'll see some of the bigger name guys, bigger name guys, go closer to the deadline. Preferably, I'd like to make a few trades before the deadline, and if I was a contender, I'd probably look to make those trades earlier as well, just because it gets more man games and so on. But yeah, you'll see a few guys move, hopefully.
I thank you for saying that. Larry and I have talked about that in the show before. I am a huge fan of going after a guy that you want earlier than later, just based off what you said. More man games, more production for your team. And why wait? Obviously, I guess you can say the value will get a little less maybe towards the deadline, so we get a little bit more. A team will drop their asking price trying to move them, get a little more aggressive on them. But if you have a guy you're lining up, I think you go after him earlier than later, like you said, to help you sooner. Now looking ahead, so this season basically for you, now you're sitting 8th overall in the in the standings. Is this going to be let's go for a championship type of a run for you, or is this kind of going to be like let's give our team some experience here, get some younger guys, and kind of gear up for next year?
The plan was always a 2-year rebuild. I took over this team at the start of last season. So the plan from them was to sell off, blow it up, and a 2-year rebuild, and hopefully be a contender after 2 years. So by next year, the start of next year, I'm hoping that our team will be in the top 10 for a few years at least, be a perennial contender. That's the plan anyway, but we'll see, I guess.
You might be a little ahead of your thing there. You might be pulling the Rangers, might be a little ahead of your timeline. Obviously, Jacob Trouba, talking about Rangers, is he leading the team right now? I think he might be leading your team in fantasy points overall right now. Obviously he was an all-star.
He's our best defenseman. Well, I would say that.
Yeah.
But I think Sam Bennett is our top player now in terms of fantasy points.
And we all watched Trouba in the All-Star game. Yeah, Sam Bennett,
yeah.
Talk about the All-Star game. What'd you think of that experience?
Oh, well, All-Star games are always a pleasure. I mean, I guess for the players, there's no better feeling to be named All-Star, even in like the voting process, or even if you're, so just to be an all-star as a player is a great reward. Even being an athlete myself, I played a bit of volleyball, and if you're named to a team with all your elite pairs, well, there's no other better feeling, in my opinion. But the all-star games are always entertaining.
And you've built type of a Broad Street Bully approach there. I can't even count how many players you have over triple-digit hits on your team. So what kind of led that to, do you guys think be the bad boys of the UFHL?
It's in my approach to building teams has always been the numbers, basically. So whatever gets you the numbers cheapest. So in our system right now, the bangers get you cheap points, and like for example, if I went to Dan and asked to trade Brendan Lemieux for Taylor Hall, he'd probably laugh in my face. But at the end of the day, Brendan Lemieux gets me the same amount of points as Taylor Hall did. Well, at least he did a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure about now, but you know what I mean? Like, I guess a lot of GMs don't really look at it that way. They kind of just see the player or whatever. But for us, it's just about the numbers.
I think Larry and I both owe you an apology on the All-Star game as well. We both picked against your team, and it really ended ugly for us. I think by the first period, we both had no crap moment, and my over pick was the only thing that hit. Larry was completely off. I mean, he had you losing by, I think, like 7 goals, whatever he had. So I apologize for him. I apologize for picking against you as well. It was a fantastic coaching decisions, and putting Markstrom in there to start the game off, I think threw us both off. But yes, it was a very cool experience overall. So I thank you for your involvement in that, and also we are very sorry.
No worries. Those simulations, they're a crapshoot anyway. Let's be honest. Yeah. But it was
I
good
guess
fun.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm excited for next
Yeah.
year. Hopefully, it's even bigger and better. Now going back to your first involvement in the league, what's the biggest? I guess I don't want to say improvement, but the biggest changes you've seen from the start of the league to now.
Uh, GMs being involved, I would say. At the start, there probably was 12 or 13 of us that were active day in, day out. Now I'm sure there's 25, or even, I don't know, 30 of 32 is probably pretty active. And if they're not active, they got assistants who are active or scouts who are active. You know what I mean? It's a much more active league right now than it was 3 years ago, we'll say. Uh, it's it's my biggest pastime, and I enjoy every minute. I'm glad to be here. Uh, it's, fantasy sports, and especially fantasy hockey, has always been my biggest pastime, and I feel like this is the elite group of fantasy GMs, and it's only getting better all the time. So
Yeah, no, it's incredible to see the league. But from my vantage point of not being involved in the league, not coming into the league, it's incredible to see just the, like you said, the involvement and the detail and the extra effort that everyone puts into it. It is truly it's remarkable to see all the man hours that go into this league. And it is obviously some people it's a profession, and it's more than just me updating my fantasy hockey roster every week. It is a day-to-day grind. So kudos to you and the rest of the GMs that do put that time in and all that effort into to make this league what it is.
thanks. And like I said, I'm happy to be here. I'm pretty sure I can speak for most. We're all pretty happy to be here, I'm sure. It's a fine group of people.
Now here's a tough question for you. If Kamikaze is not winning the championship this year, who is?
That's a tough question. I don't count Arnie and the Royals out. I'm going to say that Arnie is
He'll really
active.
appreciate that too.
Yeah, Arnie is probably the most active GM in
pump.
this league, so he's still got a few tricks up his sleeve, I'm sure. Yeah, the Titans got a really strong team, and it's going to be tough to catch them. And Brian and Jeff, they're the Ice Vikings. They're coming on strong. I don't know if they'll catch the top 5, but they're coming on strong, and I'm really impressed with their push in the latter half of the season. But if I had to pick one guy, I think Arnie is the guy. He still got it. He still got the 2 tricks up his sleeve, I'm sure.
All right, we'll be looking out for that. Is there a name that you think could be moved that might be a surprise by the deadline?
I seen Ryan put JT Miller up on the block, so to speak. Be nice to see him go to a contending team. He got a real nice contract, and a few teams, I guess, with our salary, they need a player like that, cheap, especially in a league where there's no retained salary. You need cheap contracts to get you points. So I'm going to say JT Miller would be a pretty good catch for a team in the top 5.
And maybe not the trade deadline this year, but maybe this offseason. Is there a certain position you were really looking to upgrade?
I feel our team, our weakest spot is our defense. So I'm always looking to upgrade our defense. But I don't... More the youth on D. I'm lacking the next man up on defense, if that makes sense. I got lots of forward depth, but the defense probably, yeah, definitely.
If you could summarize the UFHL in one sentence, how would you summarize it?
My favorite place to be.
I love it. I love that. Donny, thanks so much for coming on, taking the time, and good luck the rest of this season. We'll definitely be staying in touch. We'll be watching the team, and thank you for tuning in every week, and we appreciate all the hard work you do.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm happy to be here, and anytime you need me to come on and have a chat, I'll be around.
Sounds good. If you make a big move, we might have to bring it back on, so get to work on that.
Oh, yeah. Always working. Always working.
Well, be good.
Will do. See you, man. Take care.
Thanks so much, Donny Tulk, for coming on with Kamikaze. And now we go from talking with Donny about some of the possible moves he can make to now bringing in Mr. Insider Larry Fisher. Larry, we got some trades that went down, and you also might have a list of possible players that could be on the move coming up.
Yeah, Kyle, bit of a slower week. We had the big 11 trades the previous week, some blockbusters. This week we only had 4 trades. Only one that would sort of classify as a quasi blockbuster, but lots of trade winds blowing, as they always say, and then lots of potential names out there. Again, with this being, as Donny said, a full cap league, the cap really does come into play at this time of the year, much like it does in the NHL. I mean, we've seen a lot more trades in the UFHL than the NHL, put it that way. But when you got the salary cap involved, there's a number of contenders that are close to the cap. There's a lot of even sellers that would have to be money in, money out. You look at a franchise like Strong Island. They'd love to trade one of their big fish, some guys that are over $5 million, but they basically need to take back an even cap hit or a cap dump of some sort to offset that in order to stay above the cap floor. So the salary cap's always the great equalizer in a league like the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League, but plenty of potential for trades. Like I said, there was 4 this week, and I feel like calm before the storm in some regard. We're just heating up, and as you mentioned, put together a big trade board of all the names that are out there, and we'll break that down in a bit here and highlight some of the names of real interest, including a guy like JT Miller, who was a surprising addition to the big board, Fisher's big board. But it'll be interesting to track that over the next 2 weeks and see how many of those names we can knock off that big board. If there's 60 names on it and we can knock off 20, I think I'd be tempted to take the over on that, even at 20 potential trades between now and the deadline 2 weeks from today on March 21st. So lots of trade action to come in the UFHL.
It is coming up fast, Larry. And let's start off with our first trade of the week. I think it's the first trade we have on our board here. Ryan Schmaltz had made his first move as a GM of the Gators, acquiring Jesper Voquist and sending away Corey Perry there.
Yeah, we put the Gators on the trade watch last week in the Insider segment.
Yeah.
We said they're
You're
eager
3 for 3 now, Larry.
They're eager to put their stamp on the franchise. We expected a move to come sooner than later from the Gators. Not the blockbuster trade that I'm anticipating we could see yet. I wouldn't say this trade necessarily puts a stamp on the franchise, as you know, but it will go down in history as the first trade involving general manager Ryan Schmaltz and the Conacher family. Sort of the trade they'll look back on for sure. If the rest of the league doesn't remember it, they'll remember it as their first acquisition. And how fitting that it's Jesper Voquist, a teammate or former teammate in the Devils system of Ryan Schmaltz. Ryan obviously captains the Utica Comets, the AHL affiliate for the New Jersey Devils, and Jesper Voquist has been back and forth between Utica and now up in New Jersey and starting to produce for the Devils. I know the Royals were reluctant to give away Jesper Voquist. No longer waiver exempt, has to be on the active roster. So that was one thing that I think that the Royals maybe just didn't have a spot for him, but he was a second round pick. They believe he's trending up in his career. He's got a decade to go now with some decent, middle 6 production as a skilled winger. Whereas Corey Perry, we all know he's sort of at the back end of his career, but look at where he's at. He's in Tampa Bay. As Donny said, look out for Arnie and the Royals as a contender. They're adding pieces to their puzzle for the playoffs. Corey Perry's a playoff-bound player, proven playoff performer, and certainly going to give the Royals a boost down the stretch. So from the Royals' perspective, I think that's a no-brainer to bring on a guy like Corey Perry. Even though he's at the later stage of his career, they reunite him with Ryan Getzlaf, who they acquired earlier this season. And the Royals also last month acquired Zach Parise. So they've got a few of these guys over 35 years old. And you look at Parise, he was having a slow year. Royals pick him up and he takes off. Corey Perry's actually having a really good year in Tampa and a very productive player. So the Royals get a nice boost for this stretch run, although he's at the back end of his career and being a dynasty league, he might not have many seasons left, whereas Jesper Voquist becomes a piece for the future for the Gators, and certainly somebody that Ryan Schmelzer knows well from the Devils system.
Yeah, it's funny. Ryan goes after a teammate of his or a former teammate of his with his first move. That's something that we brought up to him in our interview, if he'd be interested in acquiring a teammate. And sure enough, the first move he makes is for one. Now we had Donny on the show, and we talked about probably the biggest trade of the week, a blockbuster involving Vladimir Tarasenko, who was having a good year for Kamikaze, but he is now sent to Rock Republic in a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and I think Donny did a great job covering it off. Obviously, knowing that Kamikaze is still looking to the future, they see next year as their big year. Adding 2 draft picks, a first and second round pick, and although it's 2024, still a couple years away, the UFHL has a 3-year window for draft picks. So they had a couple quality picks in 2024 that no doubt Donny Tulk will be looking to package, whether it's before the trade deadline or in the offseason. He's going to turn those picks into productive players, which is something Donny's done extremely well. Is, as he mentioned, he doesn't want to pay league entry fees. He wants the franchise to perform well enough to cover the league entry fees. So far, so good for Kamikaze. And as he mentioned, exceeding expectations. They were the 16th overall in the standings last season, and they were as high as 6th this season. So they've went up, approximately 10 spots. They're the biggest riser in the UFHL. And a lot of that's due to asset management from Donny. He's naming off guys like Jack Quinn, Matthew Boldy, Victor Soderstrom. The list goes on of these top 20 NHL draft picks that Donny's been able to acquire without spending out of pocket. Other franchises are bidding to draft these players and spending, thousands of dollars on these prospects. And Donny's finding creative ways to stay competitive by trading vets, guys like Vladimir Tarasenko, for a guy like Morgan Frost. And obviously Morgan Frost has been a bit of a disappointment to this point in his career, but still a young enough guy. If Claude Giroux's traded out of Philly, which everyone's expecting, a guy like Morgan Frost as a real offensive catalyst type, because you got guys like Evan Hayes, guys like Sean Couturier. They're more so two-way guys, where Morgan Frost has that real offensive flair. Donny obviously identified him as a target that could potentially get a top 6 role next season and be a very productive player for the Flyers, plus 2 draft picks. A decent return for Tarasenko, but again, as you mentioned last week, Kyle, I think across the league, the values, the asking prices are starting to trend down. You look at what the Royals paid for Valerie Nichushkin and Ryan Lomberg a month ago, would seem higher than what was paid for guys like Taylor Hall and Vladimir Tarasenko, potentially. But again, a guy like Nick Paul, Zach Sanford, 2 guys from Ottawa. Who knows how long they'll be in Ottawa, but both those banger types, Josh Manson, again, Donny talks about getting the hits, the penalty minutes, the fights, those physical categories being sort of the Broad Street bullies of the UFHL. They add a lot more sandpaper. Even a guy like Noel Achari is a very physical guy, gets into occasional fights. So some good assets for the future with Frost in the picks, but also sticking to their mantra of getting those physical guys. And for Rock Republic, they're in a better position to take a run at the playoffs. You get Vladimir Tarasenko. St. Louis is going to be a playoff team in the NHL. He's going to hopefully be a productive guy in the playoffs. Tyler Ennis kind of a throw-in maybe, but Mark Borowecki's a guy who chips in points as well as Borokop, the big tough defenseman. So some toughness going out of Kamikaze as well. But obviously the key piece for Rock Republic is Tarasenko, as well as the 2 Russian prospects in Mammon and Miromanov. Who knows what they'll amount to, but overall it's basically Tarasenko for a big package in return, but highlighted by Frost and the 2 picks. And certainly Rock Republic likes Tarasenko joining guys like Patrice Bergeron and Sebastian Aho. They're maybe better suited to take a run this season, as Donny said. So helping out his former franchise a little bit in their playoff aspirations and give them a little boost to Kyle Roberts and the Rock Republic.
And 2 teams that are square in a playoff race battle. Outlaws and Battlehawks make a move here. What do you think about that trade?
Yeah, interesting moves the last few weeks from the Battlehawks. Obviously, they made the big Alexander Holtz trade that we covered off last week. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, Scott Lawton was a key piece back there, because Scott Lawton signed a really team-friendly extension in Philly. And obviously, Philly's starting to rebuild now a little bit. I don't know if Lawton's going to be on board to stay there if he wants to go chase a cup at some point. But he's got a very team-friendly contract. And I thought he was a key piece in return for Alexander Holtz. So I was a little surprised that they turned around and flipped him so quickly for Nick Dowd, Christian Vesalainen, and a second-round pick in next year's draft. That'll be a later second-round pick, likely from the Grizzlies, but certainly Mick Bortoni comes from a scouting background. He knows that he's got the book on Christian Vesalainen, who was a first-round pick, hasn't popped yet for Winnipeg, but big sort of power forward type guy that they take longer to develop sometimes, so you could be getting value in Christian Vesalainen, as well as obviously Mikkel. Mikkel turned that second-round pick into a good asset, no doubt about it. But for the Outlaws, just continuing to increase and improve their forward depth. Scott Laughton and Derek Brassard in this deal, they obviously made a follow-up deal as well to free up some cap space and better manage their cap. But overall, it could be a win-win, but I certainly like the value to the Outlaws getting Scott Laughton, and even Derek Brassard can produce at a decent level. And certainly the Battlehawks are hoping that Christian Vesalainen realizes his potential as a first-round NHL draft pick.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting move in the Outlaws. Again, like you said, right afterwards, made another deal, opening up some cap space, trading Alexander Wenberg to the Blizzard for Elias Anderson, who, again, another first-round pick, but I saw firsthand with the Rangers, kind of flamed out in the Rangers organization. Now with Los Angeles trying to find his game, obviously take a flyer on him and just hope maybe something clicks there. I think it's now his maybe it'd be his fifth professional season now. So taking a flyer on a former first-round pick there.
Yeah, and still a guy that's under 25 years old, even though he's been around the NHL for a while. Still a younger guy. His dad was obviously a pro guy. His dad, I believe, is a scout in the Kings system, so he helped bring his son over there. And actually, you look at the AHL, I think Elias Anderson's on a conditioning stint right now because he's not waiver exempt, so they had to send him down through a conditioning stint coming off injury. But he scored 2 goals in back-to-back games and scored again last night. So he's got 5 goals in 3 games in the AHL. He's proven that he's probably above that level, but he's one of those sort of guys that I don't want to call him a tweener, but he's got to find his place in the NHL. And when you look at Alexander Wenberg and the game he has, probably Elias Anderson could really model his game after an Alexander Wenberg and become that type of sort of middle six center, likely a third liner in the NHL, and trying to find his role and just that chemistry and those line mates in Los Angeles. He had a decent role there earlier in the season with guys like Gabe Vilardi, but Los Angeles has a lot of forward depth, and Todd McClellan's really been had the blender going all season on the bottom 6 as far as where guys fit in. But I do think Elias Anderson still has the potential. And again, by shedding Alexander Wenberg's contract, that allowed room for guys like Scott Laughton. So staying cap conscious, you can say the Outlaws are, making sure they maintain that cap room, bring in Laughton, send out Wenberg. And for the Blizzard, they have a ton of cap space. They did acquire Tyler Seguin earlier in the year, and now Alexander Wenberg, who Seattle in general has had a tough expansion season, but I do think guys like Alexander Wenberg, he'll either trend up in Seattle or he'll have trade value at some point down the road. I think he's still got some offense to offer and some two-way play to offer that can help the Blizzard going forward. But certainly the Outlaws, when you look at the 3 in, 3 out, you get Scott Laughton, Derek Brassard, and Elias Anderson in exchange for Wenberg, Dowd, and Vesalainen. I think that's an upgrade for the Outlaws and maybe brings them that much closer to the Battlehawks. As you said, in that 8-13 range, Kyle, there's 76 points separating 8th place from 13th place. So, and we saw this week the Royals, they gained 61 points, or actually 66 points on the Titans from Wednesday to Sunday. So that's how fast things can change in the UFHL.
Everything
60 points
is
in a matter of 3-4 nights.
Everything is tightening up. We saw a top 5 switch. We saw the Titans and the Royals get a little closer there. In our standings this week, we had the top 13 because from 8 to 13 is not much, like you said, not much difference there. And there's a lot of teams battling for that top 10 spot, which brings us to trade deadline time, 2 weeks away. And you've gone through and you made the Fisher big board here of possible moves and possible players that are on the block here. And there's some names that you see there like, oh, wow, that can make a huge impact down the stretch for one of these contenders.
Yeah, some of these names are shock value when you look at the 1 to 20 list. Again, so let's start at the top. Braden Point and Alex Pietrangelo. Well, when you're looking to the playoffs in the UFHL, if you're a contender and you know that a player on an NHL playoff team is going to earn you more revenue in the playoffs because you don't have to lease them from Strong Island or Eliminators, now's the time to go get them. But you look at Strong Island especially, Braden Point, he's at... he's going to take a raise next year. He goes up to $9.5 million next year. I believe he's at $6.7 million this year. So essentially, Strong Island, in order to trade Braden Point, they need a $7 million player back. That's going to be a tough move to make in order to get a $7 million contract back. plus get the pieces that for the future that justify trading Braden Point. But his name's out there. Alex Pietrangelo as well would be a guy from the Eliminators who's out there. Obviously, Vegas' number one defenseman. Vegas, Tampa Bay are teams that are expected to probably make the Final Four or potentially make the Final Four again in the NHL playoffs. So I think those are two big targets, two big fish. But I really think that the deal has to be just right as far as money in, money out for Strong Island, and certainly the return for the Eliminators. Those are the two biggest names on this 1 to 20 list. But guys like Matt Duchene, we had Donny Tulk on the show today. Jeff Carter, I think there's a very good chance. Like when you talk about Braden Point and Alex Pietrangelo, those might be deals that are done in the off season when you can go over the cap ceiling and under the cap floor, and you got 3-4 months to adjust to get legal again for the start of the regular season. A lot of these bigger ticket names might be dealt in the off season when there's more cap flexibility. Harder to make the move now. Even a guy like Matt Duchene, but a guy like Jeff Carter, I think is a really a player that the contenders. You look at Pittsburgh; they're looking strong, and Jeff Carter really stepped up down the stretch in the playoffs last season. So I think he'll have value. I know Bentley Jacks are shopping Josh Bailey hard, and whenever Brendan Kopp puts somebody on the trade bait board, they tend to be moved. So Josh Bailey's one I think we'll definitely see move probably before Mikael Granlund, even though I think there'll be more interest in Mikael Granlund. The Outlaws have been dangling Andrew Kopp for a long time now. I think he's certainly in play, maybe for one of those guys like a Mikael Granlund or something along those lines, or even maybe a Jeff Carter type thing. I think we could see some deals among contenders just shaking it up. But overall there, Duckman's domination, obviously a seller at the bottom end of the standings. You got guys like Phil Kessel and Jakob Siffelberg and Troy Brody. But obviously, Duckman's want to be a contender next season. So how much of the present do you want to sacrifice in order to have that future? Although Duckman's can shed a lot of salary, so if they find a buyer for Phil Kessel that can give him a couple nice pieces for next season, cheaper pieces, I'm sure he'll be on the move. And obviously, the Royals, Brandon Tanem's on LTIR or should be on LTIR. That's been an ongoing controversy in the UFHL because Seattle Kraken haven't put him on LTIR yet, but. So his cap hit's still lingering for the Royals, and they'd certainly like to package him probably with some prospects in order to get a similar player to Brandon Tanev who's actually going to make an impact down the stretch. And Ben Sherratt had a big game this week, 2 goals, including the overtime winner. He was a big part of why the Royals gained ground this week, but I think maybe sell high on Ben Sherratt. Joe Veleno's in there as a package type guy as well. So lots of names here in this 1 to 20 that are realistic. The way I ranked this big board, Kyle, was sort of the realistic guys, probably starting at number 4 to number 20 that I think we really could see moved. I do think Point, Pietrangelo, and Duchene are big fish. If somebody can find the cap space to make it happen, I think those guys would be a big splash ahead of the trade deadline in 2 weeks. But the rest of this 4 to 20 is sort of maybe not Phil Kessel, but the majority of those names are guys that I think we'll realistically see traded between now and March 21st in the UFHL.
I think a team, I was looking at some salary caps. I was playing my own GM role over here, Larry. And when I saw Braden Point's name, for some reason, the Gators stuck out in my mind with a contract like Van Riemsdyk that could possibly go the other way and match up with them somehow. I think that could be the deal that we've talked about of giving them that identity since taking over the franchise. I think bringing in a Point, I mean, you can't get too much bigger of a guy. I feel like that's an asset that's tradable. You're not going to probably trade McDavid, but a superstar in the league. And I think for some reason the Gators stuck out to me as a team that could be the stamp they put on this franchise to lead them into the postseason. Is him.
You know what? That's not a bad idea. And you mentioned James Van Riemsdyk. Okay, so James Van Riemsdyk's going to go the other way to offset the salary for Braden Point, basically dollar for dollar. What do the Gators have to throw in? I mean, you're obviously looking at. You're probably right off the bat looking at guys like Scott Perunovich and Robin Salo, 2 top defense prospects. You might have to throw in another younger producing player, and they do have some pieces there, and certainly draft picks. I think if Strong Island could tweak that and they could trade Braden Point for JT Miller and plus something, I think that might be more attractive to Strong Island, but then I don't know if it's as attractive for the Gators. So it is always fun to play GM mode, and I think Strong Island could use a defenseman too. I mean, I think they're building out their defense, but they're very young.
Matthew
back there.
Joseph is there, I think.
yeah, Matthew Joseph could be an option, but you certainly have some defensemen with the bigger price tags too. Guys that when we look at the 21 to 40 trade bait board, you can see guys like Tyson Barrie, Justin Falk, Torrey Krug's on the last unlikely trade bait board, but certainly guys like Tyson Barrie and Justin Falk have contracts that could almost offset a Braden Point type guy too. So there's always ways that these franchises can get this done. And when we look here, the goaltenders are interesting. There's a lot of franchises that don't necessarily have a number 2 goalie. Even the Stingrays, you mentioned Cam Talbot on the who's not list. Their backup is Eric Comrie in Winnipeg. The way the playoffs work, Kyle, is they would have to waive Eric Comrie to remove him from the playoff roster prior to the playoff draft. If they don't waive him, he would automatically be on, or I guess Winnipeg's probably not making the playoffs in the NHL. So Eric Comrie on the playoff roster might not be a concern for the Stingrays, but certainly you look at guys like, depending what happens with Braden Holtby at the deadline, lots of talk Anton Forsberg could even be moved out of Ottawa. The Titans, certainly they have Andrei Vasilevsky, best goaltender in the league, likely, arguably Igor Shesterkin, but Andrei Vasilevsky's another Russian stud for the Titans. But they have Jake Ottinger, who's actually no longer waiver exempt for next season. His waiver exemption just expired. He's down on the protected list. He's safe there, but he's getting a lot of points for Dallas, Jake Ottinger. Although Anton Forsberg's been really good in Ottawa, but I think the Titans might want to trade Anton Forsberg rather than risk losing him on preseason waivers next season or trading him in the offseason. Now might be the time to get some value on Anton Forsberg, and then you can run with Vasilevsky and Ottinger down the stretch rather than waiving Forsberg, who I believe they paid over $300 for on the waiver, acquiring him through a waivers auction earlier this season. The big name among goaltenders, obviously Darcy Kemper of the Bentley Jacks. That was a huge surprise that his name is even on this board, but Brendan put the name out there as somebody they're willing to negotiate on. And I know there are a few franchises have reached out saying they're having serious conversations about Darcy Kemper. So fascinating to see what that deal could potentially look like. And another name that is very surprising, I know we mentioned Justin Falk and Tyson Barrie, also Alec Martinez from the Gators. Potential interest if they want to bring on some a higher priced forward. But the name that really jumps out here or stands out here is Beau Horvath of the Stallions. Probably people that are reading through these names right now are saying, Beau Horvath, where did that come from? Because his name has never been mentioned as potentially available from the Stallions. But talking with Ian Constable, he said that Beau Horvath's the player from the Stallions that gets the most interest. And he's listening, right? He's not making any counter offers or not really shopping him, but people keep knocking on the door for Beau Horvath. And obviously the Stallions have been on a rise. They've pulled away a little bit by 40, 50 points from the Godfathers as far as securing the final playoff spot, the wild card in the Allen Conference there as the 5th seed from the Gretzky division. And Beau Horvath's a big part of that Stallions franchise. So you look when they traded Matthew Tkachuk for Quentin Byfield, they brought in guys like Dylan Cousins, guys like Tage Thompson, some younger guys. I think if they're going to move Horvath, they're going to need another core piece that's probably already contributing, a younger, cheaper core piece like they've targeted with their other deals. But Beau Horvath's an interesting name that's out there. William Karlsson as well. I think the Gators might be more inclined to move Karlsson for the right return. I think he's out there. Another young guy that has had a breakout year that's on the trade bait board as somewhat of a surprise is Oliver Shillington from the Crypto Knights. He had a bad fall last week, but no worse for wear. He's a guy that, talking with Dan Nadeau, everybody asks about Oliver Shillington. Unfortunately, nobody's offering what Dan considers fair value yet. He already sold on Taylor Hall. I don't know if he's going to move Oliver Shillington, but that's another name to really watch out for going towards the deadline. And Dan would certainly have to clear that one with the owner because Sharice Schultz, the owner of the Crypto Knights, is a huge Calgary Flames fan. So Andrew Mangiapane and Oliver Shillington, they're having great seasons for Calgary, and they're even higher in the respect factor for the Crypto Knights. Unlikely to be traded, but certainly guys that are of interest, as well as the other Calgary defensemen, Noah Hannafin and West Coast Express and Chris Tanev for the Tornadoes. Again, franchises looking to really shape their playoff roster, because the way it works, Kyle, going into the playoffs, any players that are on NHL playoff teams, you retain going into the playoff draft, and then you draft out the remainder of your roster are leased from non-playoff UFHL franchises. You're drafting players that made the NHL playoffs. So, for example, the Tornadoes, they're not going to make the UFHL playoffs. The Royals could draft Chris Tanev for their playoff roster, or they could trade for him in the next 2 weeks and not have to pay that leasing leasing fee to borrow him for the playoffs. They'd already have him on their roster. So certainly a lot of franchises shaping their playoff roster now that they feel comfortable they're in playoff position down the stretch. But certainly still lots of sellers emerging as well over these last 2 weeks. As you see by the 21 to 40 list here, there's a lot of interesting names. Again, some higher price guys that maybe aren't necessarily the easiest to move with so many franchises so close to the cap ceiling. But I mean, you just played the game with Braden Point. If there's a will, there's a way. You can take back a guy like James Van Riemsdyk and throw in some sweeteners with a couple real top selling prospects that are going to twist their arm to take a guy like James Van Riemsdyk.
Yeah, and going into your last part of this list, I think this is where I think some people might say, Larry, you're crazy with some of the names on the bottom list here, because when I saw the list, I said, ooh, those are some big-time names. Now, I assume these are more of the players that you don't assume are going to be traded, but definitely you've heard their name floated around.
You nailed it, Kyle. These are the long shots that I don't really see getting traded. A lot of them, I think, again, are off-season type moves because they have the big cap hit and it's hard to fit in. But the shock value, you're right. We could have put Mitch Marner and Adam Fox as 1-2 instead of Braden Point and Alex Pietrangelo. But I don't think it's realistic that the Stingrays are going to move Marner and Fox. They basically came out. Arlo Scholz, the owner of the Stingrays, came out and said, you know what? These guys are out there. I'll put their names out there, but this is going to be the platform-wide biggest SCO trade we've seen to date, because there are franchises in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League. You have to trade a hockey asset in every trade, but you can add unlimited score coin, which has a USD value to any trade. In football, we saw Nick Bosa traded for 60,000 score coin, which at the time was 15,000 USD value for one player. Also, there was a couple prospects included with that score coin and some other players going the other way, but that's the biggest one we've seen so far. We have seen other trades in the 10,000 USD value, sort of in that 40 to 50,000 score coin. But to part with a guy like Mitch Marner or Adam Fox, I think, Arlo's a smart guy at the current price of score coin. I think he wouldn't accept anything less than 100,000 score coin for one of those players. And again, I don't know if that price is pretty steep for any. I mean, Arlo's and the Stingrays are in 5th place right now. You look at those top 4, who wants to cough up more than 100,000 score coin to bring in a ringer like Marner and Fox? That's more than you would make back from the prize pool this year in score coin. But it's a dynasty league. You have Marner and Fox for the next decade and to build around. I mean, as these prize pools get bigger and bigger, you could recoup that investment. But it seems like a long shot. You're right that those two would move. And certainly the Stingrays, like I said, they're in a great position for this season. They're taking a run at the Founders Trophy, at the Klein Cup down these 8 weeks to go in the regular season and then into playoffs. And again, we talked about it last week with the Stingrays. They're going to have to make a move at some point in the offseason because Marner and Fox, or Marner's contract's already kicked in, but Fox and Zach Werenski get big raises next season up to that $9.5 million range. So the Stingrays have to free up $15 million in cap space in the offseason, and maybe that's what they're looking at. Let's recoup some score coin as part of a blockbuster trade. And if somebody's willing to pay up before the trade deadline and get one extra year out of studs like that, then bring it on. As far as a 6-figure score coin trade is what I'm thinking there. And the rest of those names on that third slide, like you said, Kyle, is for the most part long shots. Some of those defensemen at the top there could potentially move. I think Pedersen and Brandon Carlo and guys like that. But generally speaking, those are bigger contracts that are harder to move in general in a cap world. And certainly guys that are maybe better suited for an off-season type shakeup when the cap flexibility opens. You can be above the ceiling, below the floor, and have a few months of wiggle room there. So, but all names that are legitimately out there in the UFHL. And like I said, you set the over-under at 20 out of these 60 names between now and March 21st, Kyle. I'd be tempted to take the over that we'll see 20 of these 60 names off Fisher's big board traded by the deadline.
Number 60 on your list jumps out to me. Jeff Skinner, 23 goals this year for Duckman domination. His contract is just obviously what it is. But the guy is producing this year. Could a contender actually make a run at him, you think? Or would Dean jump at any moment to get rid of him? Like what? How do you think that? Do you think Dean might hold on to him because maybe there is hope for him to turn it around? He's such a conundrum, that guy.
Yeah, well, like I said, Jeff Skinner's doing his best to earn his contract, earn his cap hit, the $9 million man this year. He's on pace for almost 40 goals, so it's hard to say that Jeff Skinner isn't a valuable player in the UFHL right now. And then people have to evaluate, is this the coaching change in Buffalo? Is this a sign of things to come? I mean, Buffalo's going to trend up. Can Skinner be part of that? Does he have trade value in the NHL suddenly now? Maybe in NHL, maybe Seattle or somebody looks at him. Arizona, we know, is going to need to reach the cap floor next season. So could Skinner get traded in the NHL? Like, no, that was unfathomable at this time last year. And now Skinner's played his way back into having some type of value. But again, I think at $9 million for that many more years, it's a tough sell for Duckmans. If somebody asked about Jeff Skinner, I'm sure Dean would perk up and would definitely be listening. And then I'm sure there'd be some sort of cap dump coming back the other way. But the reason Duckmans acquired Jeff Skinner from Dynasty was to acquire some nice future assets attached to. As a cap dump, they got Martin Chromiak and some other really nice assets. I believe Ty Tullio might have been part of that deal. But some nice assets, some nice prospects for the future in order to take Jeff Skinner. Duckmans had lots of cap space this year, so he brought him. Actually, Duckmans is only like $3 million from the ceiling. They're kind of like some of these franchises in the NHL you wouldn't expect to be that close to the ceiling because they're rebuilding. But Duckmans doesn't have a lot of cap space, so I do think they'd like to move Skinner because they want to improve the rest of the roster next season. And there will be other franchises in the UFHL that need to take on a contract. Some of the sellers, we just talked about Strong Island. Well, they're 20-some million from the floor. If they have the right deal for Braden Point and they can take Jeff Skinner on to sort of float them with cap space, and then they can get back, instead of taking back a James Van Riemsdyk, they can get back, maybe an Alexander Holtz and a couple star prospects, then maybe that's something they look at to take on it. I don't want to call Jeff Skinner an anchor anymore because he's not. He's a productive player, but maybe there is an opportunity for Duckmans to find the right fit for somebody that either needs cap space to make the floor or somebody that sees value in Jeff Skinner going forward.
You just touched on the salary cap. Out of these contenders, who has the most cap going forward that can maybe take on a bigger contract here at the deadline than, say another team that maybe is also competing, but they're kind of strapped for cash right now?
And that's a great question, Kyle. And it's something we really have to look at when we hypothetically make these trade scenarios in the UFHL, because it is a full cap system. And like Donnie said, there's no retained salary in the UFHL, not as of yet. That could be something that's proposed this offseason. But you look at the contenders, and I look at Red Army. Granted, they're going to have some raises coming next season, and they are rebuilding, and they don't want to take on a long-term contract. But if there was a rental type situation with some of those players that have big cap hits, but they're only this year and next year, or only this year, I think Red Army with $11.4 million, the fact they're trending up, they're only 15 points out of 8th place. They could take a run at top 5 still. As the defending Klein Cup champion, maybe Mooch and Jeff want to defend their playoff title as well. They got some young guys trending up, guys like Trevor Zegras and obviously Lucas Raymond. Alex Lafreniere has been better lately. Their young guys seem to be taking a step in the second half of the season, but could they bring in some more veteran support? Maybe a guy like Alex Pietrangelo. He'd look pretty good on that blue line. Not that it doesn't look good already with Jamie Drysdale and Quinn Hughes and all the young guns, but maybe you bring in a guy like Alex Pietrangelo or some big ticket. You got that $11.4 million. The only thing is that cap space isn't there forever. All those young players we just listed off, they might go from $1 million to $10 million in the next couple of years. So you got to manage that cap, and they're saving that cap room for future seasons. Kamikaze, Donnie sort of mentioned they're more likely to be sellers than buyers, but they do have $11 million in cap space to work with. The Outlaws, we mentioned with the Wenberg and Lawton situation, $10.3 million. If the right name out of those players that are close to that, $7 million plus range, if the right fit was there for the Outlaws, they certainly have the cap space to make that move. The Brutes, obviously, you look at the Brutes situation, it's a tough one. They're kind of in no man's land. They're a couple 100 points back or 150 points back from the second wildcard spot in the Legends Conference, but they're so far ahead of the rest of the playoff race contenders in that conference that Jesse Gill has sort of said, we'll entertain potential to buy here and maybe make a push. Guys like Sidney Crosby's healthy. Rupe Hintz is coming on. Obviously, they need Samuel Girard to pick it up. Can't be getting negative fantasy points from him. But the Brutes, you look at last season, the Brutes were a playoff franchise. They lost David Krejci. They lost Shea Weber to LTIR. they essentially lost Philip Grubauer. He went from being their MVP in Colorado to their number 2 goaltender behind James Reimer now that Grubauer's in Seattle. And you just look at that Brutes roster. They traded away Logan Couture as a higher priced guy. But with Shea Weber on LTIR, they have that cap room of $9 million to potentially bring in a ringer. And obviously, Weber's not coming back anytime soon, likely going to retire, but let that LTIR float for the Brutes. So, interestingly, I think the Brutes could make a move. Can West Generals, they're a franchise that traded away Tyler Seguin. You look at what they have coming next year. Joel Farabee and Matthias Ekholm are getting raises. That's going to chew up that $7.6 million. But the Can West Generals are one of the hottest teams in the UFHL. They're all healthy. Patrick Laine's lighting it up. Clayton Keller's lighting it up. Thomas Chabot coming on strong. They have the cap room, if they want, for this season to bring in a ringer down the stretch too and really make a push into that top 10 and try and be more of a playoff contender this season. And then guys like Stallions, Ice Vikings, Rock Republic, and Godfathers didn't make the cut here, but Godfathers have similar cap to Rock Republic. I think Godfathers and Stallions is the hottest playoff race going in that final wildcard spot in the Allen Conference. Godfathers made their move for Jordan Stahl. I think the Stallions are interested in using some of that $6.6 million in cap space. They put their first round picks out there for the next couple years, so they could be a buyer for a fit for one of those guys, over $5 million cap hit. And certainly the Ice Vikings, they got Evander Kane. Situation went from a $7 million player to a $2 million player. That was a great turn of fortune. They've been on the rise thanks to Evander Kane's resurgence in Edmonton, and now they have that cap space that it'll be interesting to see if they utilize as well as they sort of make a push to catch the Stingrays and to push their way into the top 5 as well. So those are sort of the franchises I'm really watching over these next 2 weeks leading up to the trade deadline, because they actually have the money to add without subtracting cap space. A lot of the other contenders are closer to money in, money out. So you're trading away a good player in order to bring in a good player you think can have a bigger impact, or you're trading away a good injured player plus some good prospects for a good healthy player. Something like that potentially, but there's a lot of money in, money out scenarios at the top of the standings. But for franchises that have managed the cap effectively to this point and can bring in a ringer in exchange for futures, prospects, picks, and some score coin, those are the franchises that could really make things more interesting in the standings down the stretch with 8 weeks to go in the regular season for the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League.
Larry, that's great stuff. That's quite the list you built yourself there. And hopefully we see 20 guys leave, because that means we'll be very busy tracking those trades, and it'll be a very exciting trade deadline for the UFHL. Anything else before we let you go this week?
Like you said, Kyle, I'm hoping when we reconvene next week, we can cross some of those names off. We can tighten that board up from 60. Let's hope it's down to 45 next week, or maybe 50. Let's see some names come off that board this week. Let's get the trade winds blowing, and certainly just looking forward to these next 2 weeks. Like Donnie said, it's my favorite place to be, the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League leading up to the trade deadline, and can't wait to see the fireworks that we have in store these next 2 weeks.
Yeah, very exciting. Well, Larry, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good, Kyle.
And before we sign off for today, let's take a look at this week's Twitter poll. Which goalie has the best chance to end their slump soon? Jack Campbell, who's been getting lit up in Toronto, Mike Smith, who's been getting lit up in Edmonton, and Cam Talbot, who's had a couple rough starts here. Not the best performance since the All-Star break. All three goalies obviously playing very key roles in their team. Jack Campbell, I think he has got 8-6 something save percentage since the All-Star break as well. So, Toronto obviously is one of the top teams in the NHL. Who knows where they'd be if Campbell regained some of that, some of the play that he had earlier this season, and that great year he had last year. Mike Smith seems like night in and night out, he lets up 3 to 4 goals a night. And Edmonton is basically outscoring teams there, but they're on the outside looking in now in the playoff race. They've now fallen to that 9th spot in the Western Conference, and they're right below the second wild card. And Cam Talbot, although Minnesota is having a very good season, obviously Talbot's been a major force there. But if he can't turn around quickly, that could spell some trouble there for Minnesota come playoff time, and possible a change at goalie. They have a very good backup goaltender there in Minnesota as well. So 3 guys having huge impacts on some very good teams. So let us know, who do you think is going to be the one goalie that turns it around here to end this season and lead their team in a playoff run towards the end of the year here. So let us know on the UFHL hockey Twitter account, which will be posted later on today. Again, thank you so much to Donnie for coming on the show this week. I want to wish him all the best the rest of the season. As always, thank you to Larry Fisher for his insider segment. And I'm Kyle Hall, and we'll see you next week.